She thought he was just another customer, until he looked up from his coffee and said softly, "You look just like the woman I couldn't forget." Maya froze, her hand trembling around the chipped mug she'd been drying for the last few minutes. "Whoa. Im need just cry. Nizirli. At short starting you were." The rain outside hit the windows in slow rhythm, like the heartbeat she suddenly couldn't hear. He wasn't supposed to sound familiar. He wasn't supposed to look at her like that. For 5 years, she'd built this cafe into her quiet world. No surprises, no ghosts, just coffee, sugar, and her son's laughter in the back room. But something about his eyes, tired, kind, haunted, told her this moment was about to rearrange everything. She forced a smile, trying to steady her breath. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Do I know you?" He didn't answer. He just stared, as if memory itself had found a face again. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of rain became louder, pressing against the glass like it wanted to enter. Maya's heart was still racing, her mind replaying his words over and over. The woman I couldn't forget. She tried to convince herself it was just coincidence, that he was confused or teasing, but something about his tone was too sincere. Ethan looked like someone who had carried that sentence a long way, through too many cities, too many sleepless nights. She poured him another cup of coffee just to keep her hands busy. "It's been a long day," she said softly, pretending not to notice the way he studied her face like it might vanish if he blinked. Outside, thunder rolled far away, and the cafe felt smaller, like time had folded them into a memory neither of them belonged to yet. When the doorbell jingled, Leo came running out, his small sneakers squeaking on the floor. "Mom, I finished my drawing," he said, holding up a paper smudged with blue crayon. Ethan's expression softened instantly, his gaze shifting from surprise to something gentler, almost nostalgic. Maya smiled, brushing a curl from her son's forehead, grateful for the distraction. Ethan knelt down to see the drawing, asking Leo what he'd made. "It's a lighthouse," Leo said proudly. "Dad said he'd take me to see one someday." The silence that followed felt fragile. Maya's chest tightened. She hadn't heard that sentence in years. Ethan looked up, eyes dark with something unspoken, as if he too carried stories about promises that were never kept. Ethan stayed longer than he intended. He asked for a refill, then another, until the clock above the counter crept past closing time. Maya didn't have the heart to tell him to leave. He spoke about his travels, mountain trails, forgotten villages, nights sleeping under unfamiliar stars. She listened quietly, realizing she hadn't heard a new story in years. But there was a distance in his words. Like each place he described was a way to escape something, not to find it. "You ever feel like home is the only place that doesn't recognize you anymore?" he asked softly. Maya looked at him, and for the first time, didn't have an answer. By the time Ethan finally stood to leave, the rain had slowed to a mist. Maya handed him a paper bag with a slice of leftover pie. "On the house," she said with a polite smile. He hesitated before taking it. "Thank you," he murmured, his eyes lingering a moment too long. As he stepped outside, the bell above the door chimed softly, and Maya felt a strange pull in her chest. A quiet recognition she couldn't explain. She turned to wipe the counter, but her reflection in the darkened window startled her. For a fleeting second, she didn't see herself. She saw the woman from his story, the one he couldn't forget. She blinked, and it was gone. Only her tired face remained, framed by the quiet hum of the closing cafe. Ethan came back the next morning, and the one after that. By the end of the week, he had a favorite table near the window, where the sunlight touched the corner of his camera lens like a small secret. Maya told herself it didn't mean anything. He was just another traveler passing through. But every time he smiled, that careful, guarded smile, something inside her softened. He started bringing photos to show Leo. Oceans, bridges, mountain peaks, and Maya caught herself lingering by their table longer than she should. It had been years since her days felt this full. And yet, She hated how her heart waited for that doorbell to ring each morning, because it meant hope was coming back, and she didn't know if she was ready for that kind of pain again. They began talking about small things: coffee beans, ocean tides, the way seagulls always seem to follow storms. But beneath the easy words, there was something unspoken, a rhythm only two people carrying loneliness could share. One evening, as she wiped tables and he packed his camera, Ethan asked, "What made you open this place?" Maya hesitated. "I needed somewhere quiet," she said. "Somewhere that didn't ask questions." He nodded, his expression softening. "Sometimes silence is the loudest place to hide." Their eyes met briefly, and in that glance Maya felt something dangerous, recognition, like she'd met this ache before in another life. One rainy afternoon, Leo climbed onto Ethan's lap, studying the buttons on his camera. "Can you take a picture of my mom?" he asked eagerly. Ethan froze, the request catching him off guard. Maya laughed it off, embarrassed, but Ethan slowly lifted the camera, his voice soft. "Sure, buddy." Through the lens, he watched her wipe her hands on her apron and try not to meet his gaze. The shutter clicked once, then again. Something inside him shifted. Later, when Maya saw the photo, her hair loose, light spilling across her tired face, she didn't recognize herself. It looked like someone learning to smile again. Days turned into weeks. Maya found herself waiting for Ethan's stories, the way he spoke about faraway places like they were old friends. But what she didn't see was how carefully he studied her, memorizing the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she laughed, how her eyes softened when Leo spoke. He'd thought his heart was buried under years of regret. Yet, every day here, uncovered something he didn't know still lived. One evening, as the cafe emptied, he left a photograph on the counter. The one he'd taken of her. On the back, in neat handwriting, were 4 words. "You look like peace." That night, long after Leo fell asleep, Maya sat by the window with the photo in her hands. Outside, the ocean murmured under a blanket of fog. She hadn't let herself feel this kind of stillness in years, not since the night she lost everything. She touched the edge of the picture, remembering the way Ethan had looked at her, not like a stranger, but like someone rediscovering a memory. For the first time in a long time, she didn't cry thinking about the past. Instead, she whispered into the quiet, "Maybe this is what healing looks like. Not forgetting, but learning how to stay." And somewhere in the distance, the first light of dawn broke through the mist. The next morning, the sky was heavy with fog, and the cafe felt unusually quiet. Ethan arrived later than usual, carrying an old leather-bound notebook instead of his camera. He seemed distant, distracted, as if walking through someone else's memories. Maya noticed the shift immediately. The way he hesitated before speaking, the way his gaze wandered to the window every few minutes. "You okay?" she asked gently. Ethan nodded but didn't meet her eyes. "Just thinking about someone I used to know." His voice was low, fragile. Maya wanted to ask more, but didn't. Still, she couldn't ignore how the silence between them began to fill with things unspoken, stories buried under years, and truths too heavy to name. That afternoon, Maya found the notebook still lying on the table after Ethan left. She hesitated, then opened it, meaning only to see if there was a name inside. But what she found made her breath catch. Pages filled with photographs, all of the same woman. Some smiling, some blurred by motion, some half-torn. The resemblance was undeniable. Her hair, her eyes, her quiet way of standing in the background. The woman looked almost exactly like Maya. Flipping through, she found one photo with a faint caption written in blue ink. "Lena, 2018. The day she left. Maya's hands trembled. The name meant nothing, but the face felt eerily familiar, like she'd seen it somewhere in a dream she wasn't supposed to remember. When Ethan returned later, Maya was waiting. The notebook sat on the counter between them like a confession neither wanted to voice. "You left this," she said quietly. He nodded, his expression unreadable. You saw it, didn't you? She didn't answer, just looked at him. Really looked. Who is she? She finally asked. Ethan hesitated. Someone I lost, he said softly. She disappeared after an accident. I thought I'd made peace with it, until I saw you. The room seemed to shrink. For a moment, Maya didn't know whether to feel pity or fear. And you think I look like her? She whispered. Not just look like her, he said, voice breaking. You sound like her. That night, Maya couldn't sleep. The name Lena echoed through her thoughts like a whisper she couldn't place. She went through old boxes in her closet, searching for something. She didn't know what. A photograph fell from an envelope. Her and her late husband on the pier, smiling, sunlight caught in their hair. But in the background, blurred by distance, a man stood with a camera. She stared, her pulse quickening. It couldn't be, but it looked just like Ethan. Her breath caught. The photo was dated 2018, the same year written in his notebook. The connection hit her like thunder. Maybe their lives had crossed long before she ever knew his name. When Ethan arrived the next day, Maya confronted him with the photograph. You were there, she said, her voice trembling. At the pier, that day. Ethan stared at the photo, his color draining. I remember that shot, he whispered. I was working on a travel piece. I didn't know you were. He stopped himself. You took this, she said. You took this the same year she disappeared. Ethan's eyes met hers, filled with something between guilt and wonder. Maybe the universe never forgets faces, he said softly. Maya looked at him, tears glinting in her eyes. Or maybe it keeps repeating them, she replied. And in that moment, neither was sure which answer hurt more. The cafe had never felt so quiet. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed distant. Ethan sat alone at the corner table, hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee he hadn't touched. Maya stood across the room, her gaze fixed on him, heart pounding with the weight of unanswered questions. Tell me who she was, she finally said. Ethan lifted his eyes slowly, exhaustion clouding them. Her name was Lena, he began. We met years ago while I was shooting a story about the coast. She was an artist, painted ocean waves that looked like they could breathe. He paused, swallowing hard. We fought the night she disappeared. I told her I needed space. She left in the storm. Her car. They never found her. Maya's throat tightened. And now you think I'm her? Ethan shook his head softly. No, I think you're what she was meant to find if she'd stayed. Nishwar, which tries to do. That night, Maya walked to the pier where she and her husband used to watch sunsets. The sea was restless, dark and shimmering under the moonlight. She thought about Lena, this woman she'd never met but somehow mirrored. Was she living someone else's unfinished story? Or was fate just cruelly circling back? The wind whipped through her hair and she whispered into the night, "Why me?" But there was no answer, only waves crashing against the rocks below. For the first time, she realized how fragile the line between memory and destiny could be, and how easily love could blur them both. Ethan found her there the next morning, sitting on the edge of the dock with her shoes beside her, toes dipped in the cold water. He approached quietly, unsure if he had the right to speak. I shouldn't have told you, he said. Maya turned to him, her face calm but unreadable. No, she replied. You needed to. They sat in silence, the soft rhythm of waves filling the space between them. I keep thinking, he said finally. Maybe I was supposed to find you. Maybe this is my punishment. Or my mercy. Maya looked out at the horizon, the early light painting the water gold. Maybe both, she whispered. And for a brief, fragile moment, neither of them felt alone. Back at the cafe, Maya found herself staring at the photo wall she'd built years ago. Snapshots of customers, friends, and her son's drawings. She added the picture Ethan took of her. The one had captioned, "You look like peace." As she pinned it, her reflection appeared in the glass beside Lena's face from the notebook. They seemed to merge for a heartbeat, two souls tangled in time. She whispered, "If you're out there, I hope you found yours too." Behind her, the bell above the door chimed softly. Ethan stood there, eyes red from sleeplessness, carrying something in his hands, Lena's old pendant. "I think this belongs with you," he said quietly. Maya held the pendant, its metal warm from his hand. "You kept it all this time?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded. "I thought if I ever found her, I'd give it back." She studied the charm. A small seashell, smooth and worn, with initials etched faintly on the back. "Phew," she whispered. The moment hung in silence before she placed it on the counter. "Maybe it's time to let her rest." Ethan's eyes glistened. "And what about us?" he asked. Maya looked at him, her voice steady. "We start where the story ended." The words lingered between them, fragile but real, like the first breath after years of holding it in. The next few days passed like slow rain, quiet, endless, and heavy. Maya started opening the cafe earlier and closing it later, hoping the extra hours would keep her mind busy. But the truth was, she was avoiding him. Every time the bell above the door rang, her heart leapt with both hope and dread. She couldn't forget the way he'd looked at her that night, with guilt, longing, and something that scared her more than anything: sincerity. She told herself she needed space, yet the empty chair by the window felt louder in its silence. Leo noticed too. "Where's the cameraman?" he asked one morning. Maya smiled faintly. "He's probably traveling again." But deep down, she knew he wasn't gone, just waiting for her to be ready. Ethan didn't stop coming. He just came when she wasn't looking. Sometimes he'd leave flowers by the door, sometimes a note tucked under a cup. But Maya never responded. Each gesture reminded her of how fragile this connection was, how easily it could be broken by the weight of what they discovered. One evening, she found a photograph slipped beneath the cafe door. The pier at sunset, the sky painted gold and crimson. On the back, in his handwriting, "Some endings still look like beginnings." She pressed the photo to her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks. Maybe love wasn't about finding what was lost. Maybe it was about learning how to face what remained. Leo, unaware of the quiet storm in his mother's heart, asked one evening, "Mom, why don't you talk to him anymore?" She hesitated, unsure how to explain heartbreak that wasn't about betrayal, but about fear. "Sometimes," she said softly, "people remind us of things we're not ready to feel again." Leo nodded, thinking hard, then whispered, "But maybe that's how we remember who we are." His words hit her deeper than he knew. That night, after putting him to bed, she sat at the counter in the dark, the pendant gleaming faintly beside the cash register. Maybe distance wasn't safety. Maybe it was just another name for loneliness. Days later, Ethan returned, not for coffee, but to say goodbye. "I got an assignment overseas," he told her quietly, his voice barely steady. Maya nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. "Maybe that's good," she said. "Maybe you'll find what you're looking for." He gave a faint, sad smile. "I already did." The silence that followed hurt more than she expected. He reached into his jacket and placed a photograph on the counter. One he'd taken of her and Leo laughing together. "Keep it," he said. "It's the only picture that feels like home." And just like that, he was gone, leaving behind the scent of rain and roasted coffee, and a space that no longer felt hers. That night, Maya stood outside the cafe long after closing, the photo clutched to her chest. The sea air was cold, the waves whispering against the shore. She thought of Ethan boarding a plane somewhere, of all the words they never said. Maybe some people came into your life not to stay, but to remind you that your heart still worked." She smiled through her tears, whispering to the wind, "Thank you for finding me." Behind her, the cafe lights flickered once, reflecting her silhouette in the window. A woman who had finally learned that letting go didn't always mean losing. Sometimes it meant breathing again. Weeks passed. The cafe carried on, filled with strangers who didn't know the story that lived in its walls. Maya found comfort in the ordinary again. The smell of roasted beans, the hum of conversation, the clink of cups against saucers. But sometimes, when the afternoon light hit the counter just right, she'd catch herself expecting him to walk through the door. Life had returned to normal, yet something in her had shifted. She no longer flinched when memories surfaced. Instead, she let them sit beside her, like quiet friends. Healing, she realized, wasn't a sudden sunrise. It was a slow dawn that crept in after the storm, reminding her that the world still shimmered when she chose to look. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, Ethan stood on a windy cliff overlooking the Atlantic. His camera hung loosely at his side, but for once, he didn't raise it. He'd been taking pictures of landscapes for weeks, yet every horizon looked the same. Beautiful, but empty. That's when he realized it wasn't the places he'd loved capturing. It was the people who gave them meaning. He pulled from his jacket the photograph of Maya and Leo, laughing, edges already worn. "You look like peace," he whispered, and for the first time he understood what that truly meant. It wasn't about finding someone who reminded him of the past. It was about learning to forgive himself enough to deserve a future. Back home, Maya sat with Leo as they folded laundry. He found the pendant again and asked, "Whose is this?" She hesitated, then smiled. "Someone who helped me remember who I was." Leo nodded thoughtfully, then looped it over her wrist. "Then keep it," he said. "It's part of your story now." She kissed his forehead, eyes glistening. Maybe love wasn't meant to be held forever. Maybe it was meant to leave traces that taught you how to begin again. As she watched her son giggle at his mismatched socks, Maya felt it. A gentle peace that came not from what she'd lost, but from all that had remained. Ethan sent a postcard. No return address, no grand goodbye. Just a photo of a lighthouse and 7 handwritten words. "Some lights never stop guiding us home." Maya found it tucked in the cafe mail one morning. She read it twice, then placed it on the wall beside the picture he'd taken of her. The words lingered in her heart like a quiet hum. She didn't know if she'd ever see him again, but she knew she didn't need to. Some connections weren't meant to be finished. They were meant to remind you that you were still capable of feeling something true. That evening, after closing, Maya stepped outside with a cup of tea, watching the last colors fade from the sky. The sea was calm again, the town quiet, except for the distant cry of gulls. She thought about everything that had brought her here. Loss, love, coincidence, and the strange way people's lives sometimes collided for reasons they may never understand. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, wherever you are." For the first time in years, her heart didn't ache. It simply existed. Open, steady, and free. Somewhere far away, under a different sky, Ethan smiled, without knowing why. Spring arrived softly, the kind that brushed the air with salt and renewal. The cafe filled again with laughter, tourists, and sunlight that lingered longer each day. Maya moved with a calm rhythm now, her hands steady, her eyes brighter. There were still moments when a face in the crowd made her heart skip, when the bell above the door made her glance up too quickly. But the ache had changed shape. It no longer asked why, only whispered, "Thank you." She realized that love didn't have to return to be real. Sometimes it only needed to pass through you long enough to remind you what warmth felt like. One afternoon, Leo ran in holding a crumpled newspaper. "Mom, look," he said, pointing to a photograph printed on the front page. A lighthouse, waves breaking around it, a man with a camera silhouetted against the sky. Maya froze. She knew that angle, That steady way of seeing the world. The caption read, "Local photographer captures light beyond the storm." She smiled quietly, her heart swelling with something softer than longing. "He found it," she whispered. Leo tilted his head. "Found what?" Maya hugged him tightly. "The piece he was chasing." That evening, Maya closed the cafe early and drove to the cliffs outside town. The sky burned gold and rose, the ocean mirroring the light in gentle ripples. She stood near the edge, the pendant around her wrist catching the wind. For the first time, she didn't think about what was lost, only about everything she'd learned to keep. She whispered, "I forgive you. And I forgive me too." Her voice trembled, not with sorrow, but release. Sometimes healing wasn't about mending what broke. It was about learning how to carry the cracks with grace. When she returned home, Leo was waiting with a box of art supplies. "I want to paint like you used to," he said. Maya blinked, surprised. "Like me?" He nodded. "Like Dad said you could." For a moment, the past flickered, all the things she'd buried beneath survival. She sat beside him, dipped the brush in color, and guided his hand. The first stroke was shaky, then sure. Together they painted a small cafe by the sea, a sky clearing after rain, and two tiny figures standing by the door, holding hands, looking toward the horizon. Months later, as summer shimmered across the coast, Maya hung a new painting on the cafe wall, the one she and Leo had made. Above it, she placed a single note written in neat handwriting. "Some lights never fade." She stepped back, took a deep breath, and smiled. Outside, the waves glittered beneath a wide-open sky. Maybe Ethan was out there somewhere, framing another sunset through his lens. Maybe he'd think of her when the wind carried the scent of coffee and sea. But whether he did or not didn't matter anymore. She had already found what she needed, not in him, but in the life she'd rebuilt, in the quiet rhythm of her own heart.